बस done. Greetings to all. I am Sejat Chokya, and today I will deal with the topic archive memory and historical power, reconstructing the past in George Orwell's 1984 and Kazuo Ishiguro's An Artist of the Floating World. Here are my academic and as well as my presentation details. There is the table of content. Literature often explores how societies remember, record, and interpret the past. History is not only a record of events, but it is often shaped by power, ideology, and system of memory. As in 1984, a totalitarian society where the state controls the archive and it manipulates historical records to maintain political power. This novel illustrates how the control of information and memory is controlled by the party, and history is reshaped by them, and it influences collective understanding of the past. Same happened in An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro, which explores the history is reconstructed through personal memory and narrative reflection, which can be reflected in the character Masuji Ono, and how it reshaped the understanding of historical events. My research question for this presentation is that how do archives and system of power shape the construction of historical truth in 1984 and An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro? How does George Orwell portrays the manipulation of archives and historical record as a mechanism of totalitarian control? How does Kazuo Ishiguro use memory and narration to reconstruct and reinterpret the past? What do these novels reveal about the relationship between memory and power and historical authority? Hypothesis would be historical truth is constructed rather than fixed, shaped by power and narrative control. In 1984, the state monopolizes archives to control memory and rewrites the history. In An Artist of the Floating World, history emerges through subjective memory and narrative self justification. Both novels demonstrate that control over memory and historical narrative determines ideological power. Theoretical framework would be Archive and Power by Jake Derrida. Archives are not neutral record but structure of authority and control. As Derrida argues that there is no political power without control of the archive. Controls over archive determines how history is recorded, preserved, and interpreted. In totalitarian control of history, totalitarian regimes maintain power by manipulating historical narratives, and the rewriting of history becomes a political strategy to sustain ideological authority. Collective memory is shaped by social and cultural frameworks rather than individual recollection alone. Collection memory is influence how societies interpret and reconstruct the past. Benjamin rejects the idea of history as a continuous narrative of progress, as history appears as fragments of memory interpreted from the perspective of the present. Historical control in 1984. George Orwell's dystopian society illustrates how political power manipulates historical records to maintain ideological truth. Party exercise over the past through systematic manipulation, and it archives ideological conditioning and suppression of individual memory. Winston Smith's experiences shows that his experience expose how the control historical narratives becomes a mechanism to totalitarian demonstration. Manipulation of archives and ideology. In 1984, party controls history by rewriting archives, the Ministry of Truth. Winston alters past newspapers so the party always appears correct, turning archives into tools of political authority. As Orwell writes, all history was a palimpsest, scraped clean and re-inscribed exactly as often as all way was necessary. As Theo Finnegan's argued that totalitarian regimes maintain power by erasing historical traces and controlling archival memory. The concept of doublethink forces citizens to accept contradictory truths, preventing them from questioning the manipulation of history. Winston's resistance and struggle for historical truth. Winston resists that party is manipulation of history by preserving personal memory and writing secret diary, which often is connected with the personal memory. The diary function as an alternative archive challenges the party's control over historical truth. Winston declares Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 plus 2 make 4. As Irving Hose argues that 1984 presents history as a nightmare where truth become unstable under totalitarian power. And also, as Judith Scheckler notes, that the novel exposes how totalitarian regimes eliminate independent historical consciousness to maintain authority. Memory in An Artist of the Floating World, uh, unreliable memory in post-work reconstruction of history. An Artist of the Floating World, history is reconstructed through the subjective memories of Masuji Ono. Ono's narration is unreliable, and he gradually revises his account of his role in Japanese wartime propaganda. His shifting recollects how that the past is not fixed but interpreted through present perspective. As Timothy Wright argues that Ishiguro presents history as a moral lesson filtered through personal memory and reflection. The novel therefore shows how post war society reinterprets history in order to confront political guilt and responsibility. Personal memory as archives. Ono's recollection of function as personal archive that reconstruct the cultural and political history. Unlike the state controlled archive in 1984, Ishiguro presents a emerging through individual narrative and memory. Rebecca Kearney poses that Ishiguro employs a translation realism where identity is not an essence but a cultural mythological construction mediated through the narrator's language and selected. Memory, therefore, does not simply preserve the past but reshapes the interprets it. Comparative analysis. In 1984, history is controlled through state archive manipulated by the party. As Theo Finnegan notes that totalitarian regimes maintain power by controlling archival memory and erasing historical evidence. In An Artist of the Floating World, history emerges through Masuji Ono's personal memory and the narration, which is unreliable. Timothy Wright argues that Ishiguro presents history as a filtered through personal memory and moral reconsideration. Power and Historical Truth in 1984. Political authority construct historical truth through archival control and ideological manipulation. In Ishiguro's novel, historical truth is shaped by subjective memory and post-war reinterpretation of the war. Both texts therefore reveals that history is not fixed but constructed through system of power and narrative controls. Here is the conclusion. Both 1984 and Artist of the Floating World reveals that history is not a neutral record but a constructed narrative shaped by power and memory. In 1984, the party maintains authority by controlling truth, power, and history's historical record. As Derrida suggests, that control of the archive determines the authority to define history, while Halbwachs shows that memory itself is socially shaped. Ultimately, both novels expose how power is ideology and memory determines the way society understand and reconstruct the past. Here are the slides of references. If you have any question, please feel free to ask.
Sejad, my question is so Sejad, my question is if even personal memory can be biased like in Ishiguro, then is resistance to power like Mr. Diary actually effective or just an illusion?
Thank you, Shivani, for your question. Resistance is important, and his diary writing is also important, but it is limited because there are also personal aspects which affect that. Because the diary writing is something personal, but it also consume is also covers something historical truth, historical events which happen. His diary represents an attempt to preserve objective truth. Uh, so therefore, resistance exists, but it is never fully secure because both external power and personal or internal memory can reshape reality. Is there any questions?
So, Sayyad, you showed that both political power and personal memory shape history. So, which one do you think is more reliable in the preserving truth?
Okay, Aditya, thank you for your question. I think that both interpretations are unreliable because in 1984, truth and historical preservation is controlled by party and it is manipulated by them. While on the other hand, in Artist of the Floating World, history, memory, and the truth is shown through the perspective of Masuji Ono, which is quite personal. So, in that sense, both are unreliable, but there is this sense of uh, that idea of that both are somewhere true. Both are somewhere reliable. But if we see that in 1984, party is manipulating truth and historical events and historical preservation, and in 1984, it is also affected by personal justification and personal memory, and also through past. That is why, in that sense, both are unreliable. This is from my side. Thank you so much.